We were talking about the LGBT movement earlier. So one of the people, it tells the story of actually a Russian border crosser into the United States who came in claiming that she was the subject of Putin's persecution against LGBT persons and that she was an LGBT person. Turned out later when she was pressed on in court, she crumbled, she started crying. She says, "I'm not gay. In fact, the truth is I don't even like gay people." So she had just lied as a way of creating a persecution victimhood tale.
Right.
And it reveals who our immigration system rewards right now.
But before we get into our conversation, my name's Eric Metaxas, and this channel exists to bring you a biblical perspective on today's news, culture, and hot button issues. If you're new here or not, welcome, and be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you are notified when new videos get posted. Hey folks, welcome back. As promised, in the studio as my guest right now, someone who goes by the name Vivek Ramaswamy. Welcome.
Good to see you.
And you really are Vivek.
That is me.
There are not a lot of Viveks in my life, so I can just leave the last name.
Well, it's great to be
out.
unique. Yeah.
It's good to be unique. Welcome. Glad to have you. I'm excited. We were talking earlier. I'm an author. Today, your book comes out. The title is Truths, the Future of America First. Okay, I know what America First is. I know a little bit about you, as my audience does. The title Truths, why is that plural?
Yeah, look, I think that there's 10 things that are true that used to be too controversial to say or used to be so obvious to say 30 years ago. But as recently as 3 years ago, were too controversial to say in public. And what I want to do is to speak those hard truths, not just to conservative audiences. But my goal with this book is a little different. I want to reach audiences who disagree with us. I'm showing up on college campuses to even allowing the people who are reading this book to be armed with the arguments and the facts they can use to talk to their own left-wing friends or colleagues or family members to bring them along on questions from gender ideology to climate science to even the history of the United States and the U.S. Constitution. This book stakes out some hard, uncomfortable truths in the current cultural climate,
right,
but things that are well-grounded, reasoned, and allow everyday Americans to actually be persuaded.
So this is the opposite of your truth, my truth. We have our truths. You're actually talking about reality, immutable truths. And is there a list of 10 of them, or is this just what my notes say? Because I'm reading them here and I'm thinking, I agree violently with all of them.
Yeah, there's 10 chapters in the book.
Okay.
And it was based on, so during my presidential campaign, I stated 10 hard truths.
Whoa, you ran for president?
Yeah, I ran for president last year.
I got to say, I missed that.
Yeah.
No, seriously.
It was an adventure. It was an adventure.
Any endorsements you want to make on this program?
You know, I endorse America. That's of course, I endorse Donald Trump to be the next president and a lot of Republican senators across the board. But I do that because I endorse the core premise the United States of America was founded on. And that's what this book is about. And what are some of those ideals that unite all of us? That, you know, we live in a country where if you work hard, get ahead, you're the best person, you get the job, not based on your gender or your race. Or a country where you get to speak your mind openly as long as I get to in return. Right. So these are basic principles the country was founded on. But the book lays out 10 hard truths that were based on some of the core principles I ran on for U.S. president, which makes some arguments that hopefully will win over even those who may be undecided or even on the left.
How do you think we got to a place where people are challenging what are, to most people, obviously true things? We're talking about reality. To me, it's almost like saying, I think the periodic table is racist. We're going to dispense with that. We're going to invent a new periodic table. You'd say, wait a minute, it's the periodic table. Like, there's some basic things you can argue, but how did we get to a point where things like gender, things that until 3 minutes ago were accepted by pretty much everybody, are suddenly questioned?
Well, that is, for example, one of the chapters in the book is entitled, There Are Two Genders. The fact that that's controversial today says how far we've fallen.
Right.
Here's what's going on is, the first chapter in the book is entitled, God is Real, for a reason. When you stop believing in something bigger than yourself, when you stop believing in God or country or even your family, you start believing in new substitutes instead. And I think that's the origin of the climate change agenda, what I call the climate cult. That's the origin of the transgenderism movement. It's the origin of the racial wokeism movement. These are substitutes for purpose and meaning in our lives.
I'm sure you're right about that. Who was it that I guess it was Bob Dylan said you got to serve somebody? I think you got to worship somebody. You got to worship something. We are built by God, I would say, to worship him. And if you don't worship him, you will find a substitute. And when you talk about climate change, it has all the trappings of faith. Bull markets turn everyone into a stock market genius. Bear markets reveal who truly is. If your portfolio isn't hedged, you're gambling. A single market correction could wipe out years of gains. For nearly a decade, my friends at Noble Gold Investments have helped investors diversify by adding gold to their portfolios. Gold may help you preserve your upside potential and limit your downside risk. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com and learn how easy it is to incorporate gold into your investment strategy. noblegoldinvestments.com.
I mean, this is the stuff of scripture almost across many major world religions. The golden calf is the symbol of that, right? Moses isn't gone for very long. By the time he's back down, the golden calf is built. We have a need to bend the knee to something. You know, Blaise Pascal, I quote him in the book. He was a famous scientist of nearly 400 years ago. He famously said that if you have a hole the size of God in your heart and God doesn't fill it, something else will instead. And I think the mistake that many in the conservative movement have fallen into is often to say, we're going to play whack-a-mole. We're going to stamp out that poison one at a time, but without actually offering our own alternative vision of what actually fills that void. And so that's one of the warning calls in this book is that, you know, we had this red wave that never came in 2022. Why is that? They tried to blame abortion. They tried to blame Donald Trump. I say none of those things is really responsible. I think the reason we didn't have that red wave in 22 is that railing against the radical Biden agenda is not enough. We have to offer an alternative vision of our own. And the left, say what you will, they're very good at this, actually. The left will feed you race, gender, sexuality, climate. Well, I personally believe that the individual, family, nation, and God beat race, gender, sexuality, and climate. But the problem is we as conservatives don't have the courage right now to stand for it. We at least haven't for a really long time. And that's one of the things that, you know, certainly I'd like to change in this country, but it's one of the calls to action coming out of this book as well, is giving those everyday Americans, and you probably, let's be honest, right of center Americans here, the toolkit to be able to not only push back, but to articulate our own alternative vision. That's what I hope to do through this book.
Your first chapter is titled God is Real. And that's interesting because so many people mean different things about God, but I think we're living at a time, I've been saying this for about 3 years now, that what we're seeing, what we've seen, most people have never seen anything like it. And so the word evil comes up. In other words, you say, this isn't just political differences. We're seeing a level of madness, a level of coercion. We've never seen this kind of authoritarian thing in America. What is happening? And I think it's not too much to say that it feels evil. So I think a lot of people, as a result of that, are turning toward God, even if they're not sure what that means. They just know if there's evil, then God has to be the answer. And so Tucker has been much more expressive about things theological. A number of people who weren't there just a few years ago are going there. And it seems to me that when you talk about, you know, Elon Musk describes it as the woke mind virus, it feels like a kind of madness that has taken over the culture, such as happened in Germany in the 30s. And it seems to me that it's ultimately a rage against God. At least that's how I would frame it.
Yeah, look, I think that we are seeing a kind of new awakening in the country and in the West. I think there's a hunger to belong to something bigger than ourselves. That's what makes us different than other animals, by the way. Right? I mean, we as human beings are wired to believe in something bigger, a greater purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, without that, what are we, right? We're a different looking group of two-legged higher mammals walk in some geographic space that we call a country.
This is more of the madness. In other words, a few years ago, you know, I heard somebody say, oh, we've got to defund the police. I thought, what? Like, that's madness. You're kidding, right? They weren't kidding. The idea of an open border, it's madness. I mean, most people know that these things are just crazy, destructive. So it's almost comedic that we have to reassert things as basic as we should have a border.
It's one of the chapters in the book is entitled, An Open Border is Not a Border. And the fact that we have to say this, says how far we've fallen. But it actually ties in with even some of the other chapters. We were talking about the LGBT movement earlier. So one of the people, it tells a story of actually a Russian border crosser into the United States who came in claiming that she was the subject of Putin's persecution against LGBT persons and that she was an LGBT person. Turned out later when she was pressed on in court, she crumbled, she started crying. She says, I'm not gay. In fact, the truth is I don't even like gay people. So she had just lied as a way of creating a persecution victimhood tale.
Right.
And it reveals who our immigration system rewards right now. Right. So the immigration system sets up incentives for certain types of people to come in. You might imagine one that's based on randomness or chance. You might imagine one that's based on merit or intelligence or willingness to work hard or knowledge of American culture or the English language. None of those is the immigration system we have right now. The immigration system we have right now rewards one quality above all others, and that is your willingness to lie, actually. Your willingness to say that you are seeking asylum in this country, that you're fleeing political persecution, when in fact you are not. That is the single easiest and most effective way to get into the United States of America. And literally millions, if not tens of millions in recent years, have taken advantage of it by checking the box of saying they're being politically persecuted, when in fact they do not at all come anywhere close to meeting the definition laid out in the law. So then now think about this. We've designed an immigration system in the United States that selects for one human attribute above others, which is your willingness to lie. Turns out that if your first act of entering this country breaks the law, you tend to be more likely to continue to break the law when you're here as well. This is not speculation. It's hard fact. It's hard data. It's hard science. So to me, I think the question is, what do we do with that immigration system? I'm not somebody who just likes to observe a problem without laying out a path to solve it. It's one of the things I aim to do in this book as well. Look, moving our military to the southern border, using our own military to protect our own border, aquatic barriers in the Rio Grande, those are basic physical steps we can take, complete the wall. But we also have to fix the incentive structure, end funding for sanctuary cities, end birthright citizenship for the kids of illegals. And I go into the constitutional and legal basis for how we could do that. And then one of the things that people make a very difficult problem of the question of what we do with legal immigration. It turns out that if we actually fix and, dare I say, end the welfare state in this country, we will have fixed 75% of the immigration problem right there. And the real problem, even in today's conservative movement, it's easy to point fingers at the Dems, and I do plenty of that too. But taking a look at even the conservative movement, you have a lot of people who will complain about the immigration crisis and the mass migration crisis, but when push comes to shove, are reluctant to touch the nanny state and the domestic nanny state and the entitlement state right here at home. Fix that entitlement state, shut down that nanny state, require English as a language that you have to know to enter the country. 90% of our immigration problem is solved right there. But it takes a new generation, I think, of conservative leadership that actually has a spine to see that through rather than just writing indignant tweets, which is what it's become.
How did you get to where you are now in terms of worldview, political worldview? Were you raised in a conservative home? I mean, I'm the son of immigrants, and I feel that if you're raised in a family where the people raising you didn't have what you have, they help you to understand that what we have in America is not normal. It's a gift. I've had that innately, even though it's taken years for me to really work it through. But how did you come to think the way you now do?
Well, like you, I'm also the kid of legal immigrants to the country. My parents were conservative, certainly in the way they lived their lives. They were apolitical, largely, certainly when I was growing up, but they were conservative in the sense that they believed in hard work. They believed in self-determination. They believed that that's how you get ahead, and they believe in merit, which is something that you call it a Protestant value, you could call it an American value, is certainly a value that my parents coming from India shared when they came to the United States as well. And so I learned much more from their actions than I did from their words. That being said, I think that we have lost some of that character of, just even take the value of hard work. I think the culture we live in today is one that actually penalizes excellence, penalizes hard work. You're taught to hide your achievements rather than to be proud of them. And that's what we're now passing on to our kids and their generation across the country. Very different than the kinds of values that my parents imparted to me. But I don't want to sit here and just bloviate about that. I think the goal is to potentially, I believe we can, just turn the tide to revive who we are. The pursuit of excellence in America is something that I think we're longing to revive. And that too is one of the truths that I cover in this book.
You were at Yale Law School with J.D. Vance, and having come out of that world as an undergraduate, it's not a good place to talk about the kinds of things we're talking about now, even when you were there, which was not 5 minutes ago. But the point is that it's pretty lockstep in terms of wokeism. I mean, it was there in the 80s when I was there. When we come back, I want to ask you about that, because a lot of these elite institutions have just been pushing the madness. I was just saying, you were at Yale Law School with J.D. Vance. You and he seem to be dramatically grounded. And at the time that you were there, did you discern that you had to be careful what you said, or maybe you weren't where you are now then?
Look, I was different from my classmates. You know, funny thing is I didn't even know what JD's political persuasions were. He and I used to watch Bengals games. But for my part, I was certainly a contrarian in the class. I believe I got a better education because of it. Yale was a different institution back then, though, than it is today. It's always leaned left, but it didn't have the censorship climate, right? The censorship climate is something else altogether. And I think that's really where this story takes a dark turn. I went to Harvard for undergrad, Yale for law school, both liberal. I was conservative. I was libertarian leaning, and I still have strong liberty leaning instincts today. But that was very different than the campus climate. But I actually ended up getting more of my money's worth out of the expensive, and it was expensive to be able to go to both those places. I got more out of it because I was challenged every day. Today it's different, where you can't engage on many of these campuses on the type of debate in the open. And, you know, I think one of the last chapter of the book goes into this. It's called "The U.S. Constitution is the Strongest Guarantor of Liberty in Human History." And the reality is I explore what's going on Columbia's campus today. I mean, it's a betrayal of the cultural value. The Constitution isn't just about, to me at least, it's not just about the legal constraints and limitations on government. It's also about the kind of culture we wish to create. And in many ways, the Constitution on legal grounds is good at protecting against a tyranny of the majority, but it's not a tyranny of the majority that governs in the country today. It's a tyranny of the fringe minority.
Yes.
It's a cultural tyranny. And it's not going to be the legal aspects of our Constitution that save us from that. It's going to be a revival of that founding culture of our country, which is going to have to come as much from outside of government as from within.
You're singing my song. I wrote a book essentially about what you just said called "If You Can Keep It," because the Constitution is ultimately just a piece of paper. It can't keep itself. And if you don't have a culture of people who understand what this is and what it requires, it doesn't happen by itself. You know?
Yes.
And you can't legislate it.
John Adams spoke about this extensively. Our Constitution was made for moral people. And I think capitalism, in some ways, is a system that is made for immoral people.
There's no question.
Virtue is upstream of capitalism.
No, I actually say that in the book. Now, there's both capitalism, the free market, and people getting to vote. Both can go wrong if the people in that system want bad things. In other words, the free market,
it can amplify.
The free market can give you better pornography and drugs. It'll give you whatever you want. So if the people want that, and the same thing with we can vote in tyrants or
Sure. And that's one of the undercurrents in this book, is that virtue is an upstream condition of capitalism, is even an upstream condition of our Constitution.
Yes.
And I think that that's something we've forgotten.
Right.
You know, one of the probably most important chapters in the book is about the nuclear family to that regard, which is, you know, a society that loses its grounding in the basic pillars of virtue, including family formation, I think has no chance, even if it's granted the best of free markets in a U.S. Constitution.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of neocons or hidebound conservatives, including George W. Bush, they clearly didn't get that. They really thought that, you know, we can export our way of life easily. That if people in Afghanistan can vote, they'll vote, and suddenly, you know,
or China.
Everybody is, or China. Actually, that's
a big one.
China is the better example, because the naivete of saying that, hey, if we help them get the free market, whatever, not really thinking that it can go very, very wrong.
Right. It was this myth
tremendously
somehow
wrong.
You're going to export Big Macs and Happy Meals, and that's going to spread our core value set abroad. It didn't work out that way.
No.
But I'm not about just blaming those who came before us, because who knows? You know, we all might have made the same mistakes under similar circumstances. But if we don't learn from those mistakes, then we're actually doomed. And so that's what this book I aim to do, is to give us a North Star for what our conservative movement actually stands for. What are we running to? Not just what are we running from. And this is also something of a warning call. If this wake-up call is at least able to wake people up in the month and a half that we have to what could be a history-defining election, then I think that too will be, a positive in the dialogue in the country in the next month.
Do you think there's any question that it's a history-defining election? I mean, I think that we've never, ever seen anything as history defining. I think we're in an existential crisis.
Look, I think that that's a precondition. I mean, the way I look at it is November 5th isn't even a destination. It is the starting line. Okay. So there are many ways for the other side to win. I don't want to fall into this trap by saying that just because we win one election for one seat in November, then it's saved. No. That's table stakes. But that's really when it begins. I still am going to be highly alert to making sure that once he's elected, the agenda isn't subverted. I mean, that's also a big risk as well. So we have to be aspirational here. We can't just look at November as a fetish, but it is a clear, necessary first step to save this country. And so I'm in it to do my part, but it's not just in the realm of politics. You educate people, give them the toolkit to make the arguments themselves. That's what this book does.
You also have a title, Facts Are Not Conspiracies. I'd love to hear you talk about that.
So we traced the last few years. Where was the origin of COVID-19? Was the Hunter Biden laptop story on the eve of the last election actually real? One of the conspiracies I was accused of propagating during the Republican presidential campaign and the primaries was that Joe Biden was not going to be the nominee. Well, it turns out that if you analyze incentives, analyze the incentives of any actor, that's the best way to predict what's actually going to happen. So people ask me, how do you predict many of these things? I haven't been 100% right, but the incentives generally point you to what's going to happen. Those are grounded in hard facts. And again, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Don't be fooled twice. So this book lays out a lot of that recent history, particularly in that chapter, to say that just because somebody calls you a conspiracy theorist doesn't mean you're wrong. The sad part is in today's environment, it might even mean that you actually have a greater chance of being right or onto the right set of questions. And that's a big part of the end of that chapter ends with, what's the right prescription? It's not less speech, it's more speech. If someone's trying to silence you because they say what you're saying is a conspiracy or it's disinformation or it's hate speech, well, look, the right answer to bad speech is not less speech, it's more speech. And that is truly the American way.
And anybody who wants to read more about that can read Milton's Areopagitica from the 17th century. In the meantime, may I recommend Truths by Vivek Ramaswamy. A joy to meet you, Vivek. Thanks for coming on.
Good to be here. Thank you.